Hi, my name is Edward Rudyk, and I'm here to speak to you about the Seward Park Urban Renewal Area, also known as Spura. I think when you are discussing the development of Spura, it must be against the backdrop of its history. Spura is not just a development site, it's a site where a great injustice was perpetrated many years ago, and where an injustice is being perpetrated today. And if fairness and justice is not considered in its development, it will be an everlasting injustice. One ethnic group evicted from their homes in what is now known as Spura were the descendants of the victims of the Great Hunger in Ireland. Although there was an ample food supply to feed the starving Irish, the British, strong believers of laissez-faire, allowed foodstuffs to rot in warehouses and to rot on docks instead of being used to feed the starving Irish because they couldn't pay for the food. In an effort to further crush the Irish spirit, landlords forcibly evicted tenants who were in their arrears from their homes, and in many cases burned their homes down. The famine set off a mass migration to America, many to lower Manhattan. Many parents died in this long journey, and many couldn't care for the children once they were here. This led to a class of homeless children who survived in part by selling newspapers. There were many newspapers during this time. And they were also exploited by the newspaper owners because what they couldn't sell, they had to pay for. Seeing the poverty of these newsboys, Father Christopher Drumgoole sought them out from wherever they slept and hid, and provided food and shelter to them. In all places, the basement of St. Mary's Church, which still stands on the Spura site. Other residents of Spura emigrated from Puerto Rico, or were descendants of Puerto Ricans who escaped an extremely oppressive government on their homeland. History tells us that it was determined by the United States that non-white people cannot govern themselves. Hence, inept administrators ran the Commonwealth. Dissent was dealt with harshly, often violently. Among other injustices, Puerto Ricans were unknowingly subjected to medical and pharmacological experimentation that had bad effects on many of them. African American descendants of residents of Spura were descendants of slaves, an extremely reprehensible. The more recent African American residents of Spura, of what is now Spura, were those who came during the Great Migration to the north from an extremely violent and oppressive environment in the south. Among these descendants, or actual persons who went to what is now known as Spura, were left on sand berms during the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. So when the flood water receded, the plantation owners would still have their labor. Only a few years later, their manpower was unneeded because of automation in the picking of cotton. This led to another mass migration to the north in order to find jobs, many to New York, and to find the elusive respect and fairness which they were not afforded in the South. These were the same people who were escaping the threat of the hanging tree. It was only a year or two ago that the United States Senate passed a resolution apologized for not banning lynching during this Jim Crow era. House leadership were dominated predominantly by racist Southerners who, because of their longevity in the Senate and the House, were able to keep any such bill from coming to the floor. And you have to remember, the stranding on the sand berms reminds you of recent events during Hurricane Katrina. The elderly were evicted from Spura. Even if moving in with family, or friends or to other buildings or to an institution, this was very unsettling and traumatic for these elderly tenants, especially if they didn't want to move. My parents were forced laborers taken to Germany during World War II, and they emigrated here in 1951 along with my 3 siblings. They moved to Grand and Attorney Street and were evicted from the site in 1967. My story is not as tragic as the people of color because my color affords me better treatment than they receive. There has been a series of machinations over the site for many years which questions whether a fair and just deal is attainable. What is now the Spura area was designated slum and cleared even though the housing was still good and affordable. The existing the existing limited equity co-ops excluded many groups from buying apartments in them. A lawsuit was filed citing housing discrimination, and a finding upholding that charge was rendered. Members of the excluded group were then allowed for a short time to buy into these limited equity co-ops. Then these limited equity co-ops privatized. Then the high cost of ownership excluded many from the area from buying into these co-ops and removed units of affordable housing from the neighborhood housing stock. Continued pressure has been asserted over many years and has been successful in preventing construction of low and middle income housing on the Spura site. My friends, I'm afraid that NIMBY proponents have been victorious over these years and are in a position to exert great pressures in preventing what will be morally appropriate in the development of the Spura site. Persons who bought into the limited equity co-ops at low cost have been made wealthy, and may God bless them. Some people who bought in at market rate obviously felt safe in buying housing because they felt they had the powers behind them to block the building of affordable housing, which they are certain will bring their property values down. To them, some would say, buyer beware. When you have empty parcels, anything can conceivably be built. I will not say that, because if low and moderate income housing is built, these residents will be good neighbors and will bring needed ethnic and economical diversity into the neighborhood. There is one thing to remember. The backyard that is in question was once and hopefully again will be our front yard. Spura is hollow ground, and we must be allowed to resurrect from the graveyard those hopes and dreams. Thank you very much.